Okay, so I'm Christoph Hoffmann. I'm the Vice Principal of the Edge Hotel School, which is an education institution in the UK, and we are educating students to bachelor level while combining vocational education and higher education. So students are working in a hotel setting while actually studying hotel management. And I'm particularly interested in performance measurement and performance management in a hotel setting.
Could you please tell me what do you think are the main challenges that organizations have to face when implementing a performance management system?
In the past, I think there was a huge challenge in actually identifying data that was available. So I was working for a hotel company, and they spent a lot of time collecting data or identifying data, while now it's slightly different, because now data is more easily available in a hotel setting. By, for example, the presentation that I did was on customer feedback, so you're collecting data on doing customer feedback form service. You have a lot of information available. So I think the main challenge when it comes to that is operationalizing that information. So what does this figure actually mean? How do I actually get people to understand what this figure means, and then how do I get these people to act based on that information and change their behavior in order to drive performance? Again.
If you have identified any important trends in performance management in 2014 or in the last few years?
I mean, I think the overall trend, and I think you could see that in the presentation at this conference as well, is that there's a lot of focus on very high level stuff, on CEO level. How do the leaders of an organization measure the performance? And there's a lack. So it's a contra trend, if you like, and actually not necessarily identifying key performance indicators on an operational level and using that. So while there's a lot of emphasis over the last couple of years on the high level stuff, there's less focus on the operational level.
Do you think that's good, or people should focus more on the operational level as well?
From my perspective, and relating it back to the environment that I'm working in hospitality, it's really important to give the people who are doing the job the information that they need. So from my perspective, there needs to be a focus on measuring where the job is actually happening. Yes, and that information can go up to the CEO level, which it should all interlink, but it should be bottom-up driven, because that's where all the information sits.
Now that you have mentioned this, can you please tell me what's your opinion on the importance of cascading and adapting the entire performance management system all throughout the organization, from the organizational level to departmental and even individual?
I mean, there's this link between what are you doing in your operation and what are you doing as strategy, and then then there needs to be an overall strategy, and you need to identify how you're measuring that and how you're making sure that the overall organization is moving into that direction. I personally think that the strategy needs to be informed by the operational level as well. So moving forward, strategy needs to change based on the information that you're collecting on an operational level, because that's where you identify market trends and you see where your customers are moving to. So there's a direct link. Overall strategy defined on CEO level, but then furthermore informed by the operational level.
If you were to give 3 pieces of advice to companies that want to implement a performance management system in order for the system to be effective and efficient, what would this advice be?
I think primary focus needs to be the people working in the organization need to understand what these figures mean. So without the overall understanding of key performance indicators and performance measures within the organization, or each number is pretty useless. So it's really important that people understand that. So the education of your staff probably is the main focus, and would be my recommendation. The other thing is it needs to be really instant. So whenever something is happening, there needs to be the data need to be available. So it needs to be a focus on real-time data collection. That, from my point of view, links to the third element very much, which is the use of IT. And looking at hospitality again, there's a huge need of making sure that you're using IT to actually measure your data. So move away from pen and paper and use technology to actually be an informed organization.
Could you provide us with some examples of companies that have managed their performance very well, that you would recommend to be looked at due to their results?
It's difficult. I mean, I don't want to make a general statement, so I think staying in the remit that I know in hospitality, there are a few companies that take continuous improvement very, very seriously. However, in overall, all companies are lagging behind in really defining key performance indicators at an operational level. So it's really, really difficult to identify that. What's really interesting in hospitality is that their performance measurement systems are driven by outside companies who are providing solutions for them. So they're not necessarily developed from within. People are buying in information from different organizations.
And now my final question, what do you think of this emerging trend of measuring your everyday performance, your personal performance, like with, I don't know, pedometers and calorie counters and all kinds of measurement instruments that people use in their everyday life?
I think there's a huge excitement because you actually can do that. Overall, me personally, I'm measuring when I'm cycling, how fast am I and how far did I cycle. Do I use that information? No, it's an instant information, and yeah, it's nice to know, and that's pretty much it. I think the question around that is, so who is owning that data? That's more interesting, actually. So if I'm... Yeah, who's the KPI? Who owns the data? So if I'm measuring my heartbeat and me running around with an app, do I own the data, or does another company own the data, and how are they using that data?
So would you recommend that kind of practice for people, just to measure everything they do in their everyday life?
If you're interested in your own personal performance, feel free to measure whatever you want, but ask yourself the question, what are people doing with your data?
Is there any final considerations you would like to add about performance management in general?
I think the availability of data is really, really interesting. I think we heard it this morning in the presentation about the availability of big data. It becomes more and more complex. So it will be interesting to really narrow down, to identify the really important stuff that you need to measure. And we heard a lot about waste. So how do you identify the waste? What do you forget about, and what do you really focus on? So I think that's the next really interesting thing to look at.
Okay, that would be it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.